I left work earlier than normal today since I was so tired and needed the comforts of home. I was taken aback as I entered the living room and saw Greg and Mandy cuddled together on the sofa, their closeness palpable at every touch. My confusion turned to rage. Their betrayal hit me like a punch. "You're both fired," I said, fury evident in my tone. Their looks of incredulity just strengthened my determination. It was time for me to take charge again. As a legacy from my father, I am Kristen Brown. A 35 years old president of a small but growing company. My spouse, Greg, has been my rock for many years. Our tale started in college, when I pursued a life full of extracurricular activities and academics because I was motivated by youthful dreams. Despite my family's expectations, I decided to accept a part-time work since I was drawn to the excitement of new experiences. I met Greg there. And on that first day, his friendliness was a comfort to my anxiety. We grew closer over chats and shared breaks on the way home. But now that you've done this, that trust is gone. I have complete authority in this organization. Their disbelief subsided as my words became clear. The balance of power was evident once more, confirming my dual role as president and spouse, leaving no opportunity for deceit. Our bond grew when we talked more about each other's interests, ideas, and experiences in life. Finding out we were at the same university grew closer to one another. Before long, we were eating lunch together on campus and working together on tasks. The romance developed quickly, and Greg's steadfast goodness won my heart again. Greg brought up our future plans as graduation drew near. "Once our careers settle, shall we tie the knot?" I was not prepared for his proposal, but my heart was already made up. Greg's beaming smile signaled our path to marriage with a resounding yes. A moment that will always be imprinted in my memory. Over the years, our lives continued to blend together. Greg got a big position, and I became the president of my father's business. I had a lot of networking and supervisory obligations during those hectic days, which left me both fatigued and satisfied. I fell onto the couch one evening, exhausted from the pressures of the day. Greg looked at me with concern, wondering if I had been pushing myself too hard. I reassured him that I was well and that the weariness was due to the demands of my job right now. Greg's kind act touched my heart as he brought me a mug of my favorite herbal tea. Thankful for his constant encouragement, I made the decision to return the favor, realizing how crucial it is to keep up our collaboration. When we got situated into our new house, we seemed to be happy forever, but it didn't last. After a year of my presidency, the perfect life we had started to fall apart. Thinking back on what could have been done better, I saw how crucial communication and attentiveness are to preserving a healthy relationship. Life seemed to fall into a more laid-back rhythm until one day, Greg came to me in an unusually serious manner. "I may be facing a significant amount of overtime in the near future," he revealed, sounding worried. "It can cause you difficulty and late nights. I merely wanted to let you know, it's not an inconvenience," I told him, trying to hide my concern under a smile of encouragement. "I understand it's tough, but we'll get through it together." His appreciative smile relieved some of the knotting in my gut, as expected. Greg's overtime started, and I found myself becoming used to his late returns. I used to wait up, but as the evenings went on, I started to do it alone. Even with his growing absence, we managed to spend time together during his infrequent early returns or days off, which helped to reduce the feeling of loneliness that was beginning to sneak in. Still, I could not miss the minute changes in Greg's demeanor. He used to be so loving and caring, but now he appeared cold and uninterested in me. I was confused and offended that simple acts, like cooking meals, were received with abrupt rejections. Initially, I ascribed his behavior to fatigue stemming from his workload. Nevertheless, as time passed, I couldn't get rid of the sense that something more profound was wrong. "Are you working late again tomorrow?" One evening, I went out in the hopes of getting comfort. However, his callous reaction left me with more questions than answers. I felt lost when he went abruptly for work without looking at me or giving me comfort. I reached out, but got no response, so I was left to deal with my mounting anxiety on my own. Upon his eventual return, Greg's disposition had changed significantly, his joy standing in sharp contrast to his previous coldness. I tried to bring up the topic with him, but he didn't seem to care. I was left feeling uneasy, and it persisted even after he vanished into our house. I confronted Greg about his absence, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. "You did. Say it," I said, my anxiety coming through in my speech. "I tried calling you, but you didn't answer." I was worried. His condescending reply irritated me. With a defensive tone, he shot out, "Why does it matter where I am or what I'm doing? I'm not a child to report back my whereabouts." His lack of interest weighed heavily on me. Can't a wife be worried about her husband, fearing the worst? I begged. "What if something happened to you?" Despite Greg's assurances, his contemptuous demeanor proved to be an obstacle that separated us. I became frustrated when he dismissed my worries and went back to his room, cutting me off once more. The distance between us simply grew as the days stretched into weeks. I tried to reach out to Greg, but he was steadfastly aloof. Any sense of closeness was smothered by the intense tension in the air day by day. I saw that our marriage was falling apart right in front of my eyes. Talking and begging wouldn't be able to save what was already collapsing. There was a sense of tangible danger about the other woman's presence. I noticed hints of her in Greg's behavior, such as the subtle perfume odor and the obvious evidence of makeup on his clothes. With every new insight I learned, the ache in my chest became tighter, a silent monument to the betrayal I was seeing. I started to doubt Greg's assertions that he was working extra hours. Is it possible that he was meeting someone else during these ostensibly late hours? The more evidence I saw made it impossible for me to ignore my suspicions. My thoughts started to go toward divorce. It was a sobering realization that my once great affection for Greg had seemingly vanished nearly overnight. I was uneasy and oddly relieved at the same time when I considered getting a divorce. It was sad and freeing to acknowledge that our once passionate connection had faded, ignoring my inner turmoil. Greg went about his routine and came home late without saying a word. He made it a habit to skip dinner, saying he had other commitments and had already eaten. He seemed to be unaffected by my suspicions, as evidenced by the lipstick-stained clothing he sent to be laundered. Even though it hurt at first, I became used to seeing it and discreetly recorded every time as proof of what seemed to be coming. A talk about our deteriorating marriage. In this turbulent environment one evening, I plucked up the guts to speak with Greg. "Hey Greg, have you really been working late?" The question was hanging there, its implications hanging heavily. Even though I was aware of the danger, I was powerless to ignore my gut feeling any longer. "I've noticed your long hours, but are you sure it's not affecting your health?" I was immediately overcome with embarrassment when I realized how trite my query sounded and how weak my attempt to justify it had been. Greg's reply was just as savage as I had imagined. His tone of irritation and heavy sigh revealed his discontent. "What topic are you discussing?" "I will be working late if I declare that I am. Do you really believe I should be lying to you? You don't make any money at all, so I'm working extra for you, but you still don't trust me." His remarks were sharp and went right to the core of my fears. "I get nothing in return." "Yes, exactly. You constantly arrive home ahead of me and do nothing but lounge. You used to claim to be the president of some company, but surely it's a worthless one. Or was it that you were demoted?" I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. I knew I wasn't making so little money as to be scoffed at, but I had never showed off about it. I stumbled. "I am still the president," but my weak defense seemed to enrage him even more. That response, "Did you receive a demote? You ought to just be honest and quit making up strange lies." "No, I haven't been demoted." I made a feeble protest, but Greg would not hear me. His attacks came in thick and fast, each one stabbing straight to the core of his victimization. It was obvious that he had already decided what he wanted to do. Regardless of what I said, he only appeared to like being around me when he was making fun of me, his sly smile contorting his features when he spoke words that broke my heart. Greg's actions seemed to get worse after that, showing disrespect and disgust in every interaction. It was as if Greg had come to terms with the fact that I was aware of his affair, but instead of keeping it a secret, he openly displayed his relationships with other women, the clinging perfume smell on his clothes serving as a constant reminder of his adultery. Weekends were no different from the nights he didn't come home without saying anything or showed up long after midnight. "Are you going out again today?" When I once dared to ask, he responded dismissively, saying it was none of your business what I did. "Do you have an issue with that?" "No, not really," I shot back, accepting his icy attitude. "Don't talk to me if there is nothing. You irritate me." I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the Greg I had met earlier. Was it because of me that he was becoming someone else, or was he just being himself now? My apprehension about facing reality prevented me from asking the questions I wanted to, though there was a part of me that refused to acknowledge how lonesome and empty the house actually felt. Coming home to a dark and empty house had been the usual for me, realizing that meant addressing the reality of my failing marriage, which was a very unpleasant thing to face when I was gathering enough proof for a divorce and waiting for the proper opportunity to bring it up. Circumstances seemed to step in. I was ready to labor late into the night after a particularly difficult day at work, but the problem was solved earlier than I had anticipated. I knew no one would notice, so I left the office earlier than expected and told Greg I would be working late. When I got home, I checked my phone and saw that Greg hadn't bothered to read my message. As I had previously expected, it was obvious that I was being ignored once more. Even though I was becoming accustomed to this treatment, I suddenly felt depressed and hopeless. I went to a local store to get dinner, and when I walked home, my heart became heavier. I took off my shoes as soon as I walked in, feeling uneasy when I saw a pair of strange high heels with adorable ornaments organized in a neat way. The realization that Greg's affair partner was in our house struck me like a sledgehammer at that precise time. I took off my shoes silently and, resolved to make no noise at all, tiptoed towards the living room. I pushed the door open and saw Greg and a woman I didn't recognize cuddling up on the sofa, which gave me a bad feeling. "What are you doing?" They were both taken aback by my sudden appearance, so I requested, "What brings you here?" Did she not have an obligation to work late? Greg tried to explain their stay at our house, but his tone revealed his perplexity when I returned early. I noticed their perplexed looks. It seemed they brought her over thinking I would be late because of my work. I explained, "Why have you returned already? I may be late today." "Didn't I say that?" "You did, but you didn't say you would be late, just that you may be." "Have you even carefully read the message?" My frustration simply increased as a result of Greg's accusing tone. I shot back, always catching at words, as my initial rage gradually gave way to a composed resolve. "What's her name?" "Why should I tell you if you don't tell me?" Greg sidestepped my question, but I insisted anyway. Before Greg could reply, the woman, who was now identifying herself as Mandy, interjected, saying, "It's Mandy Anderson. Where did you two meet?" I asked, my face displaying confusion as I took in the information. "At the office. Mandy is my coworker," Greg responded, which made me feel skeptical. "So, the same company," I said, glancing between their faces, not sure where to go next. Greg's tone changed abruptly when I wondered why they were at our house. His voice rose in accusation. "What's this all about? You've been speaking your mind," Mandy added, mirroring Greg's thoughts exactly. "This wouldn't have occurred if you hadn't mentioned that you were working late. We would have crossed paths elsewhere." As is customary, their previous passive attitude had given way to hostile assaults directed directly at me. "You really don't make much money, do you?" "Sick," Greg mocked, his words full of contempt. "She seemed to be very powerful and told me she was president." She was indeed demoted. "Really? That's just too low," Mandy continued, laughing along with the joke. Their derisive chuckles pricked my ears, every slight a slash to my self-esteem. I wanted to strike back, but I knew that would only make things worse. Their insensitive remarks had gone too far. I'll have your wealthy spouse, an unattractive, non-earning wife. It's a divorce, I said, my thinking solidifying into a determination. Taking decisive action was the only way to hush their mockery. What? Their eyes grew wide with shock, leaving them speechless as they tried to process the ramifications of what they had done. I answered right away, offering reassurance and saying, "Don't worry, I'll even grant you a divorce. I'll be in charge of the conversations with your business." I cut through their complaints and pointed out how inconsistent their decision-making was. "Why do you get to make the firing decision? It doesn't make sense. Do you mean that my adultery is the reason you're terminating me? You have no evidence, so it's unfounded." "Well, I may not fire you directly, but I can certainly bring this to the attention of your superiors," I said, demonstrating my ability to take decisive action. I took a moment to pull out a business card and disclosed an important piece of information. "This company, is it you? Were you lying to us from the beginning?" I cleared up the confusion by outlining the relationship between my job and Greg's, which had reportedly been misconstrued several times. I revealed, in a cool, collected manner, "By the way, I have evidence of your affair, obtained through a detective agency." When I described the proof of their trysts during work hours, the discovery hit hard. It became clear that I had made up my mind to have a divorce. While they begged not to notify the employer, I underlined, "What you're doing is inappropriate for work. I had to report it because of this." They both recognized that consequences were inevitable as the seriousness of the situation became apparent. Despite their initial protests, I turned to face Mandy and asked her to go, saying, "Miss Anderson, would you kindly leave? Greg and I need to talk about the divorce." Even though Mandy refused to back down at first, she was unable to refute the overwhelming evidence against her and departed the premises. Nevertheless, the discussion continued after she left. I turned to face Greg and said, "You still have something to say after all this chaos. After our divorce, you intend to wed her, don't you?" I questioned him about his goals, which raised the tension. And I stepped back from the situation, leaving Mandy feeling disappointed and frustrated. "You should also move out soon, don't you think?" I said, turning back to Greg, with obvious surprise on his face. Greg asked, "Why must I leave? This residence was purchased in my name. It is, in essence, my property. What makes me the one who has to go? Could you elaborate on that?" I gave him the divorce papers silently, indicating that my choice was final and realizing he had no excuse. "Signature this year, and in 1 week, vacate the premises. The forms are useless, therefore dispose of them." Greg's response was a mixture of surprise and incredulity. "This is a bit too abrupt," he objected, saying, "How can you just spring a divorce on me like this?" I gently retorted, reminding him that he had previously mentioned divorce. "Weren't you the one who brought up divorce first? Did you say something you forgot to say? Are you able to recall anything now?" Greg tried to stay defiant, as if he was having trouble processing the sudden turn of events. "I'm not going to change my mind about the divorce, regardless of what you say now. Please sign the divorce papers quickly," he urged. I gave in and said, "Okay, if you're that keen to get a divorce, I'll grant it. I'll also be leaving the house. Proceed as you please." Greg slapped the divorce papers on the table and signed the paper with a thoughtless flourish. "Please don't return later and claim that you wish to make amends. I will remarry Mandy," he brashly announced. I shot back, biting back a laugh at his conceit, as if I would want to reconcile. "Please just watch out that you don't come pleading with me to accept you back." Greg's blustery answer did little more than highlight how detached he was from the seriousness of the situation. He appeared to be confident since he thought my warnings were just empty words. I was amazed at his lack of concern about the implications as I watched him stomp off to his room. Greg packed up and moved out of the house in less than a week. Even though they were immature, his last remarks made me laugh. I felt relieved to conclude that chapter of my life and decide not to pursue any recompense. I wanted no more needless connections with him. The best thing for the two of us was probably to get a divorce without having to pay money. Greg was upset at first, but he soon became enraged. But judging from his last response, It seemed like his resentment of me won out. I reported Greg and Mandy Anderson's affair to the president of the company they both worked for after Greg departed, supplying proof of their irresponsibility. I also filed for divorce. After hearing my story, the president appeared to have a remarkable understanding of the circumstances. He said, "What's their reputation like at the company?" After a moment of hesitation, I said, "Well, there have been some issues. They don't have a good work ethic. And other employees have told me that their work is messy. My ex-husband is reportedly dependable in work. Was that false? I don't know the specifics, but he doesn't seem to be relied upon by anyone," the president moaned. I assumed he had to be quite calm for him to be able to lie in such a circumstance. According to what he said, Greg's chances of getting promoted seemed improbable. "Thank you," I said in return. I most definitely didn't anticipate them acting inappropriately during business hours. "I want to talk to them face to face before deciding anything." In the end, the president called me a week later to let me know that Greg and Mandy had been let go. Even though they had known they would be fired, there was a little sense of relief in knowing that their termination may not have been supported by strong evidence. This should help them recognize where they are. But the evening that the president called, I was unwinding at home when my phone rang. It surprised me to see Greg's name on the screen, even if he seemed to despise me. I wondered for a while what he wanted, but then I understood that he was probably phoning to tell someone that he got fired. At first, I thought it would be good to ignore the phone, but as Greg kept trying, I grudgingly decided to answer. "Hello." I greeted them warily. With lightning speed, he shot back, "How can you sound so relaxed? You genuinely told the president about me." Greg's irate and frustrated voice exploded across the phone. I was summoned in and was let go. "I tell the truth. Additionally, I believed you mentioned that you were well liked within the organization," he charged, trying to place the responsibility elsewhere. I kept my cool, sensing that he was trying to avoid taking accountability. "Cease speaking. How will you handle this situation? Mandy and I both lost our jobs," he said, clearly furious, even though I was inclined to refute his claims. I decided to listen to him patiently since I knew that trying to talk sense into his head might not work. "Why don't you say anything?" he demanded, obviously expecting an apology or some sort of payment. "Say something," I said. "What kind of words are you expecting from me?" With a heavy sigh, "Shall I make you a job offer? Who might be employed by your company? Offer an apology and compensate us, since you made us lose our employment. Please cover our living costs. I'll sue you if you refuse. You get it?" It was worrying and upsetting that Greg never wavered in his assumption that he was innocent. "Are you really planning to sue? Specifically, what do you accuse me of? Do you believe that filing a lawsuit is sufficient?" "That's incredibly naive," I shot back, annoyed at his hallucinations. Greg shot back, not realizing how serious his situation was. "Naive? You don't have to say that to me." It was clear that there was no point in carrying on the topic. "If you want to talk about lawsuits and compensation, I'm going to hang up now," I responded forcefully. When I said, "Hey, what's up with that tone?" he became really indignant. "You're making fun of me." Despite his objections, I hung up and programmed my phone to reject any more calls from him. I had no idea how quickly my choice to ignore Greg's calls would come back to bite me. A week later, I was going about my regular tasks when the doorbell rang out of the blue. Glancing warily at the screen, I noticed that Mandy Anderson and Greg were both wearing angry faces. I wasn't ready for the confrontation they were hinting at with their appearance at my door. Under the circumstances, ignoring them might have been the best course of action. They looked very agitated, and any explosion of rage at my house, through shattered windows or shattered locks, would be disastrous. As soon as I plucked up the nerve to answer it, there was another ring and a persistent knock. I ran to the door and threw it open. "Why didn't you answer the door right away?" one of them questioned. "Don't you know it's common courtesy to respond promptly to a bell?" With a tone that was dripping with contempt, it was difficult not to laugh at their arrogance in preaching about manners when they were so poor in them. I wasn't intending to mock. I answered, merely stating the obvious lack of common sense. Their frustration, especially Greg's inability to come up with a well-reasoned response, almost made me giggle. I tried to nudge the discourse in the direction of its goal by asking, "What is it that you want? I have a limited amount of time." They made clear what they wanted: either their termination be overturned or they be paid. For the time they lost out on work and living expenses, they denied any responsibility for their situation and placed all the blame on me, not even acknowledging my own failings. Even though I had a suspicion about their intentions, I was nevertheless surprised to have it verified. I said something I'd said countless times before: "You wouldn't be in this situation if you hadn't resorted to dishonesty or simply performed your duties competently." They responded forcefully, showing their real colors. "You instigated this by taking your grievances to the president." Betraying our trust, they made constant attempts to slant the story to suit their interests. "Are you envious because Greg favored me over you?" When one of them made fun of me, I firmly retorted, "My motivation wasn't jealousy. For the length of time will you bend the facts to fit your plans?" I stood my ground in spite of their insistence. "Listen to reason," I implored, "but I cannot concede fault where there is none." I refused to take responsibility that was not legitimately mine, despite their unrelenting allegations to terminate your employment. The president ultimately had the last say. Essentially, the president decided that your behavior was inappropriate for the organization. Are you aware of the consequences of that? My voice swelling in exasperation, I let out. My statements seemed to bewilder them, and their uncertainty was evident. "Aren't you an adult now? Why are you making such silly demands?" "It's really embarrassing," I reprimanded, getting frustrated with their insistence. "Indeed, childish requests. Did you really think that requesting payment and having your firing reversed would work? Please spare me the fun." When I realized that explanation was not sticking with them, I regretfully thought of my last option. "If you refuse to calm down, I'll have to seek appropriate advice," I cautioned. One of them snapped, "Pay me compensation for the ordeal." "What? Why should we?" objected someone else. I had not intended to pursue compensation at all, but their insistence and ludicrous allegations left me with no option. "The situation changes because you're being unreasonable and making unfounded accusations." I was adamant. "Pay the money owed and make amends for your actions." They were silenced for a minute when compensation was mentioned, but soon after, complaints surfaced. "What justifies compensating a divorced person? We're not related anymore, correct?" Their abrupt awareness that they could be held accountable for damages did not result in a smooth negotiation. They begged, "We don't have the funds." Deflecting blame, they went on, "I'm sorry for everything so far, so please, let's not dwell on compensation." Even with their fairly serious apologies, I didn't change my mind. "I don't care how much you apologize, my position doesn't alter, and you might need to reevaluate if you think that an apology alone will clear your record," I said firmly. When they mentioned budgetary constraints, it became clear that they were unwilling to provide compensation. I noticed their embarrassment and said, "It's clear you don't want to pay compensation because you lack the funds." I had no concern about that. I was going to make them pay for what they had done, no matter how much it cost. Whatever they did or said, it didn't affect my decision. I made them go for the day since I knew they would be getting a call from my attorney. Despite their objections, I firmly ushered them out. The constant knocking and efforts to force the door stopped after a while, especially after I threatened to call the police. As promised, I got legal assistance and went after Greg and Mandy for payment. Even though I wasn't present for the negotiations in person, my legal counsel kept me informed. They were clearly unwilling to pay, but in the end, they reluctantly consented to fulfill their duties. Their foolish visit to my house simply confirmed my choice to divorce Greg by highlighting his immaturity. The compensation payments started to come in a year later, suggesting that they were making ends meet in some way. Greg tried to reach out to me through emails, but I wasn't going to back down. Reconciliation could never take place. His letters eventually stopped, and I stopped caring too much about what happened to him and Mandy. As for me, I kept doing well in my role as president, growing the company and getting ready for more expansion, fortunate to have a committed team. I was appreciative of the atmosphere that motivated me to achieve. I committed myself fully to my work. Every day, knowing that I could safeguard and advance my organization. That's all about the first story, and now let's watch another similar story. The fragile calm in our home was shattered by my husband's sudden statement. With my new wife and child, we're going to create the ideal family here, he declared, his voice strained with emotion. Therefore, you and our son must leave this house immediately. His words became part of the tension that had been building for months, hanging heavy in the air. Once a committed businessman in the children's clothes sector, Patrick had progressively turned his attention away from work and toward play. He jumped into a new endeavor despite my pregnancy, but his commitment wavered as the business failed. Upon learning of my parents' demise, Dad appeared to come out of his trance, only to confess to his adultery and the kid he had with his mistress. My emotions were confused and angry when I grudgingly welcomed them into our house. However, my astonishment transformed into outrage when Patrick abruptly requested that we leave. It was an absurd request, especially considering the chaos I was already dealing with. I was surprised and silent, trying to think of something to say, but our son Ryan relieved the atmosphere with his astonished rejoinder, "Dad, what's up with your sly attitude? Mom's divorce isn't that easy." His remarks cut through the atmosphere, highlighting the subtleties that Patrick didn't seem to notice. Patrick's expression changed when Ryan started to express his ideas, his face turning pale upon realizing how wise his kid was. In the middle of the chaos, Megan Baker, a 47-year-old part-time housewife juggling job and family responsibilities, stood, trying to make sense of the broken illusion of our family's cohesion. Ryan's constant support and clarity of mind provided a glimpse of optimism amidst the mayhem. Despite the fissures, I was initially comforted by Ryan's compassion toward me and wrote off his seeming disobedience as a passing phase. But when he went through high school and started working part-time, I felt a growing disdain of Patrick. It was in the busy fashion industry that I met Patrick. I worked as an editor at a fashion magazine, painstakingly creating elegant and stylish stories. Patrick, however, worked as a designer for a well-known clothing firm. When we initially met, we were talking about how to highlight his company's products and how to dress for a date. I was captivated with Patrick's sincerity during these discussions. His commitment and many recommendations sparked an idea of a bright future for both of us. I couldn't help but picture myself living a happy, creative life with him. A somewhat drunk Patrick shared his sincere ambitions during a company dinner with a ray of hope. "I want to dress my kids in the clothes I design," he admitted. His dream struck a deep chord with me, inspiring a common excitement for an exciting future full with opportunities. Inspired by our shared aspirations, our relationship flourished. After Patrick asked for my contact details, our relationship took off. Even though our relationship went quickly, we were able to find comfort and companionship in one another, and within a year of meeting one another, we were married. I was expecting soon after we were married, and I was relishing the delicate beginnings of parenting. I left my part-time employment temporarily to deal with the waves of morning sickness that came with the first trimester of pregnancy. When I gently brought up his unannounced return home one morning, Patrick confessed his audacious choice, his voice firm. "I've decided to quit my job and pursue independence," he said. I was surprised by his timing. Given our increasing family's expectations, my eyebrow furrowed in concern as I considered how realistic such a move would be. "But to embark on this venture while we're on the brink of welcoming our baby," I rambled on, my anxiety evident, but there was some comfort in the fact that Patrick never wavered in his belief that he would get a client to work for him. The weight of the preparations needed to establish Patrick's clothing firm also descended as the reality of his decision set in. I expressed my concerns over the financial burden and the careful planning required for this kind of project. Although I was worried, Patrick's optimism persisted, and I was uneasy about his lack of specific plans. I searched everywhere for possible funds, determined to help him achieve his goals. But I was met with rejection at every turn. I turned to my parents and my hour of need, their steadfast support provided a lifeline in the face of uncertainty. Appreciative of their kindness and encouraged by the approaching birth of our child, Patrick devoted all of his time to setting the foundation for his business. He worked long into the night, but his commitment to our expanding family and the prospect of a better future remained constant. But as the days went by, Patrick's manner began to soften, hinting at the storm that was building beneath the surface and the chaos that was to come. My recall of the day our child was born is still quite clear. Patrick quickly escorted me to the hospital as my water broke. His surety about work belied his obvious concern. His steady hand squeezed mine as he comforted me. "It's fine." His unflinching support seeing me through the pains of birth. Our kid, a healthy baby boy, finally came into the world after hours of waiting. However, despite the happy occasion, Patrick's face was obscured by a shadow. There was a hidden longing for the daughter he had imagined, and his disappointment was evident. Patrick had imagined a daughter during my pregnancy. Engrossed in girls' clothes designs at work, with his hopes dashed, he found it difficult to hide his disappointment. We got used to the hospital room after that first setback, but Patrick's mood stayed serious. "It's a boy," I said, feeling his dismay. The nurse tried, but failed to comfort him as Patrick struggled with his unfulfilled hopes. Patrick's disengagement deepened in the days that followed, his once present presence vanishing into the background. Having been left to handle parenthood by myself, I threw myself into the duties of raising our boy with the reassurance of my parents and the consistency of my part-time work. Patrick continued to be absent. Even while I balanced work and childcare, evenings were lonesome time. His trips back home became more irregular. His withdrawal from our life was evident as his lack of interest in our family grew. As our son Ryan matured, Patrick failed to acknowledge his accomplishments and showed no interest in fulfilling his dreams. Ryan exclaimed, "Dad, I won a gold medal in the summer art contest," but his excitement was met with a disdainful look. The distance between us grew, Patrick's absence a silent sign of his inner turmoil. But, in spite of the gap he left behind, I never wavered in my dedication to Ryan, resolved to provide him love and support even in the absence of his father. Patrick and Ryan were having a boring talk when tension started to build. "What do you mean?" Patrick misunderstood my benign comment, and his voice blazed with defensiveness. "Patrick, please, don't upset Ryan," I said, pleading with him to give our son credit for his efforts. Patrick gave a grudging compliment, but you could tell he was unhappy as he withdrew behind a closed door. It was depressing to witness his lack of interest in Ryan's accomplishments. He was conspicuously absent from school functions and significant occasions. Sensing his father's lack of interest, Ryan battled feelings of rejection, and his animosity toward Patrick grew every day. Ryan harbored a deep-seated contempt for his father as a result of his father's lack of involvement. On a Sunday night, important events transpired, overshadowed by devastating news. I said in shock, "Mom, Dad, they've passed away." The weight of their abrupt death left me reeling with words of thanks. The mystery surrounding Patrick's location added to my grief as I tried to process the magnitude of our loss. I waited for him to come back, hands shaking, desperate to have him here in the middle of the chaos. Hours passed in excruciating quiet when I tried in vain to contact Patrick. When I struggled with loss and uncertainty, the vacuum he left behind grew, and Ryan's worried look served as a moving reminder of our close family relationship. I was about to give up when I heard Patrick's familiar automobile arrive into our driveway. It was Patrick's return, but there was a new face with him, a flamboyantly dressed woman whose confidence radiated from her manner. A wave of confusion coursed through me as I tried to make sense of Patrick's unexpected companion in light of the seriousness of our situation. "Who is she?" I felt a wave of panic come over me as I tried to make sense of what was happening. My only comfort was the mask of calmness I forced myself to wear as Patrick walked towards the door. In the midst of my anguish, I pretended to be calm when I welcomed Patrick, hiding the agony that was raging inside of me and refusing to face the truth about our broken family dynamic. I was taken aback to see the self-assured woman standing next to Patrick. She said, "Nice to meet you. I'm Ashley, Patrick's wife," in a way that made me uneasy because it was flavored with possessiveness. "Husband, isn't that a little too soon?" I spoke up, clearly not believing what I was hearing as Patrick and Ashley flirted. "Sarah, they're young." Daughter was standing next to Ashley. I was taken aback by the discovery, finding it difficult to comprehend the possible consequences of Patrick becoming the father of a child with his mistress. Feeling the weight of the issue pressing down on me, I grudgingly let Patrick in when he insisted on talking about things indoors. Aghast, the tension was broken by Ryan's innocent question, and his presence served as a clear reminder of the broken family dynamic that was taking place. I reluctantly let Ryan come along, but his serious expression showed that he was much older than he looked. Patrick's statement stunned me when we got into the conversation, his callousness overshadowing the seriousness of our situation. Patrick's haughty words, "I'm divorcing you," hung in the air as he declared his plan to start a new family with Ashley and Sarah. His declaration was so ridiculous that it left me stunned, my emotions boiling beneath the surface of my parents' death. However, Patrick's delusions were brought to an end by Ryan's defiance. Ryan's resounding statement, "It's impossible to divorce Mom," stood in stark contrast to Patrick's wavering serenity. Patrick failed, the truth of his financial misdeeds exposed, his earlier offenses exposed, his failure to repay the money he borrowed from my parents to stabilize his firm is evidence of his dishonesty and broken promises. Ryan's constant support and clear thinking in the face of hardship gave us hope despite the chaos, and his everlasting loyalty was a beacon of strength at our darkest hour. The news of Patrick's financial deception came as a shock to our already turbulent position. The room was filled with Ryan's persistent determination to see that repayment was made. His persistence was evidence of his dedication to honoring his grandparents' desires, while Patrick tried to shift the blame. Ryan's calm expression revealed his developing awareness of the circumstances. His admission that he worked for his grandparents' business demonstrated how committed he was to provide for our family, a duty he gladly accepted. Feeling a surge of pride in myself, I observed Ryan standing up for himself, his statements bearing greater significance than any charges Patrick could generate. Inspired by Ryan's determination, I faced Patrick with the proof of his debt, the payback commitment serving as a sharp reminder of his broken word. Patrick's weak attempts to refute the facts failed in the face of unquestionable proof. His facade of arrogance crumbled when he fell to his knees, leaving a hollow shell of regret and remorse in its place. Patrick had his epiphany, but his priorities remained misaligned. The people he had hurt felt even more betrayed by his frantic need for quick payback in order to protect his new family. Ashley's quiet said volumes when her loyalty front faltered, exposing her involvement in Patrick's deceit to the public eye, with his duplicity unraveling right before our eyes. Patrick's hollow promises sounded hollow due to the web of lies he had built. Following the disclosure, there was a tangible feeling of deceit in the air, with the broken pieces of trust casting a pall over our broken family dynamic. And when the dust settled, a path of dashed hopes and shattered illusions revealed the brutal reality of Patrick's deceit. When Patrick and Ashley's dispute erupted, the tension in the room increased due to their harsh and accusing voices. When he watched the scene, Ryan beamed with hatred and expressed his desire for the ugly things that were happening to stop. I quickly ushered Sarah into the room, silently offering myself as a shield between her and Ryan in the thick of the mayhem. Ryan's suggestion, "Mom, we should hire a detective to seek compensation," struck a chord of justice. His maturity was evident in his commitment to make up for the wrongs that had been done to us. I took a moment to gather myself and then asked for help. Enlisting the aid of a reliable comrade, I called them, heart heavy, asking for their assistance in getting through the chaos left by my parents' deaths as well as the turmoil brought on by Patrick's lies. I was engrossed in a frenzy of activities in the weeks that followed, from planning my parents' burial to taking over the family company. Ryan stuck by me through all of the chaos, his unflinching support a comfort despite my illness and tiredness. The tenuous remnant of tranquility that remained while I battled to recover from my illness was shattered by an unexpected interruption. I felt a shiver run down my spine when Patrick's frenzied entrance at my doorstep revealed how serious the issue was. I was stunned to learn of the company's downfall from him, and when I challenged him about the implications of his actions, my amazement turned to rage. But even in my anger, Patrick's heartless indifference to my welfare served as a stark reminder of who he really was. Before I could respond, my sister Christina stepped in, her powerful presence overshadowing Patrick's pitiful justifications. She pressed for an explanation with a determination that cut through Patrick's feigned deceit. With the truth of his betrayal exposed, Patrick cowered under Christina's scrutiny, his attempts to duck accountability collapsing under her relentless questioning, and when the dust settled, the room was filled with the stark reality of Patrick's actions, shattering hopes and breaking trust in their wake. About that, I had not heard anything. Patrick's shoulders began to tremble violently. It was so satisfying that I nearly burst out laughing, but I held myself back so my sister wouldn't reprimand me in front of him. Because of his affair, Christina had actually been running Patrick's business for a while. Patrick had disregarded the administration of the business, causing it to run at an almost continual loss. I was working part-time and hadn't noticed. But Christina looked into Patrick's company and discovered it was drowning in deficits. Christina, who was well versed in business management, believed she could bring Patrick's company around. The quality of the things Patrick produced was really good, even with his awful management, so I figured it could be a good idea to try to recreate it under my firm. It is against the law to absorb it in that way without authorization. Nevertheless, I'll file a lawsuit, Patrick vowed. Well, why don't you check the repayment pledge agreement first? Megan, Christina recommended. Patrick said, give me the repayment pledge agreement. As Patrick asked, I took the document out of the drawer. Patrick's eyes flickered with apprehension, as though he'd caught a glimpse of something untoward when he saw the commitment. What's this? He inquired. The corporation was registered in my parents' names, according to the vow. Yes, my parents' names had been attached to Patrick's business. Patrick was unaware that my parents had changed the company's registration to our parents because my parents and sister had actually completed all the legal and administrative requirements for the company's establishment. Christina acquired half of our parents' estate, including Patrick's business, after they passed away. Christina was originally apprehensive about combining and purchasing the business, but after I informed her about Patrick, I sought her advice on my desire to close this business independently. It was then that she disclosed the inheritance to me, so my company has become Christina's property. I made it clear. Christina said, yes, and Patrick, you will have to leave the company. Christina, could you at least hire me as a designer? Patrick went all of a sudden modest, but his goals were rather obvious. Christina gave him a glare. Clearly not, Patrick. We cannot recruit you since this is all part of the plan to remove you, so I'll lose my job. Is that right? Well, good luck, Patrick said, looking completely hopeless. By the way, Patrick, there's something I want to show you. I took out a few pictures from an envelope. In the pictures, Ashley was seen shopping and entering a hotel with a man who wasn't Patrick. In addition, the partners in each picture differed. Some were younger, some older than Patrick. She obviously had relationships with a lot of people. Upon initially viewing these pictures, I became irritated at Ashley's carelessness. Patrick was shocked by what he saw in the pictures. She wasn't walking with me. It was a male. This isn't a montage of some sort, is it? In actuality, I used a detective service to obtain proof of your extramarital affair. Ashley has reportedly had relationships with several men. She could be considered a sugar baby. Thus, it appears that Sarah's father may not be me. It's not you, the investigator stated. Patrick was ready to cry. Perhaps you ought to have a DNA test done. So I made the decision to strike the last blow. Patrick, I can't continue to be your wife. I'm requesting a separation. In addition, I'll require reimbursement for the capital as well as Ryan's child support. It would be impossible for me to pay such a big amount without my parents' help. Patrick begged Megan to give him another chance. It's not feasible. I'm over you entirely, Patrick sobbed while on all fours, leaving Christina stunned. Patrick, it doesn't matter how hard you try, it will never help. There is no amount of money that can undo the harm you have caused to Megan. Thus, at the very least, assume appropriate accountability. With tears running down his cheeks, Patrick turned to face Christina. Then he reseated himself shakily in his chair and signed the divorce documents I had written. Patrick was then forced to take out a sizable loan in order to pay for the finances and the compensation. I was about to say that installments could be fine, but Ryan talked me out of it. Do you really believe that someone as careless as Dad could make payments over time? He will undoubtedly default. I took Ryan's advice and sought full money after realizing he was correct. Due to their concern about public opinion, Patrick's parents did not pay off his obligations. Now without a job, Patrick looked for another job. He had been essentially jobless for more than a decade, though, and no employer would take him on. He appears to be just making ends meet, working in a rather dubious field thanks to jobs offered to him by Dutch collectors. I also filed a lawsuit against Ashley for losses. Ashley also took out debts, working during the day in an office and at night at a nightclub. As the detective mentioned, Sarah's DNA test resulted in confirmation that Patrick was not her father. I now oversee my ex-husband's business, which Christina gave me control of, as part of his support duties for the company. Ryan is responsible for suggesting new items. Mom, I suggest using softer materials for the next product, he proposed. It's a wise suggestion, let's give it a go, I answered. It's a pleasure working with Ryan, and he motivates me every day. So, what shall we do today? I inquired, continuing to be inspired by the satisfaction of labor and engaging in daily activity. Above is today's story. If you like it, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up. See you next time.